Great, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about multi-account and multi-region deployments into AWS and how you can use the AWS CloudFormation StackSet feature to assure consistency between those deployments. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Chuck Meyer. I am a senior developer advocate on the AWS CloudFormation team. And what that means is I'm basically a laser-focused conduit between the developer community and the CloudFormation team themselves. I've been at AWS for about 4.5 years now in a couple of different roles, most of them out on the field talking to customers. And I spend a lot of my time talking about DevOps and how to apply DevOps practices to infrastructure, and also how that type of automation can improve your security posture by automating more and more things. My career has been about 20 years in technology, both in the public and private sector. And if you want to say hello to me after this webinar, you can find me on Twitter. So our agenda for this talk, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about CloudFormation for the folks that might not be as familiar with the service, just to kind of level set. And then once we have that information in place, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about provisioning at scale, which is, of course, the topic of the day, and how you can use the StackSets feature to help you with that provisioning. We're then going to drill into a couple of specific use cases, and I'm going to move into a demo where I kind of show you how you can use StackSets to implement one of those use cases. And then finally, we're going to end with something a little bit fun. It's some code I've been working on to actually allow you to use a custom resource to define StackSets within CloudFormation itself. And I'll show you a demo of that as well. But we're going to start by talking a little bit about CloudFormation. So CloudFormation is the AWS service that allows you to model your resources in code, in text files that we call templates, and then use those templates to deploy infrastructure into your accounts in the regions on AWS. Those deployments occur in an automated fashion. And then it allows you to manage those resources across their lifespan using the CloudFormation service. And the way that works in practice, you can see a simple diagram here. You start out by defining your resources within a template, and you can do that either by simply opening a text editor and starting to write YAML or JSON code, or you can use simple templates that are already created. This can be anything from code snippets that you'll find in the CloudFormation documentation, all the way through to complex architectures like the ones constructed by our AWS Quick Start team for things like data lakes, or compliance, PCI compliance, those types of things. So once you have your resources defined in templates, you then put them into an S3 bucket, either do it yourself or you can do it through the CloudFormation console. And then you can interact with the CloudFormation service to provision those resources from the template in an automated manner. You can do that through the console, the CLI, the APIs. Once those resources are deployed into things that we call stacks, and we'll talk a little bit more about stacks in a second here, you then have the ability to manage those stacks and those resources across their life cycle, including how those will be handled at time of deletion. So model, provision, and manage. These are kind of the three key areas of CloudFormation. And CloudFormation sort of helps you in a number of different ways across these three aspects. In the modeling space, again, you have the option of defining your resources in two different serialization languages, JSON or YAML. Once you've defined your resources in a template, then you have the ability to reuse that template to provision in a consistent manner. And also you have the ability to review how changes to those templates will actually impact the resources that you have provisioned into your account using the CloudFormation change sets feature. From a provisioning perspective, CloudFormation handles a lot of the dependency management for you. So as you list your resources in your template, CloudFormation is aware of what order those need to be deployed in for interdependency purposes. And it also has the ability to track those resources to make sure that they stabilize appropriately. If there's any problems with the change that you've made within your template, CloudFormation can roll back that change within the resource to a last good state. And also, as we're about to talk about, you can use the StackSets feature to handle that provisioning across multiple accounts in multiple regions. From a management perspective, CloudFormation uses the concept of a stack to essentially integrate different resources as a cohesive unit. This means that as you do updates, it's aware of the interdependencies between those resources, It knows the appropriate way to update them. And then at the end of those resources life cycle, when you're ready to delete, it knows the appropriate order to delete them as well. As we announced at reInvent, there is a new feature coming soon called drift detection that will allow you to determine if there have been out-of-band changes outside of your template to those resources so that you can make informed decisions about what to do about those changes. And also, because you're treating your infrastructure as code, this allows you to do all of the things that you would typically do in a CI/CD pipeline, things like code reviews and version control, and all of those types of features are now available to you in your infrastructure layer. Just a couple of statistics that we were talking about at reInvent that I kind of wanted to go over again today. CloudFormation is a service that's been well adopted by our customer base. We have over 350,000 customers actively using AWS CloudFormation to manage 2.4 million stacks, which is a pretty significant number. But I think the most important statistic on this page is the number of our large customers that are using CloudFormation. 75% of our customers, the 10,000 highest spending customers, are using CloudFormation. And so what that means is that the customers that are having these sort of larger, more sprawling, more complex infrastructures have recognized that you need some sort of tool in order to be able to manage those in a consistent manner. And that's a nice segue into our topic of the day, right, which is provisioning at scale, provisioning global environments. And where this sort of stems from is talking to customers. A lot of customers tend to come into the AWS environment and maybe pick a region that's close to where they currently are geographically or where their customers are. But over time, we find that customers, as they grow and mature their environments, start to think about how they can leverage the AWS account structures and the AWS multiple regions when deploying their infrastructure components. And there are a number of different reasons for doing this. It could be because you have critical resources that you want to make sure are isolated from perhaps development work that's being done. You might have a need for high availability or a disaster recovery that would require you to make sure that you spread your resources out geographically. There are a number of reasons for this. I want to drill into two specific ones. One is environment isolation, which is something that comes up quite a bit with our DevOps-focused Agile customers. And then disaster recovery, which is something that sort of applies to just about any large business. Environment isolation, this is for customers that are practicing continuous delivery or continuous deployment, where you are making a lot of very quick changes to a lower development environment and then promoting those changes up through a series of environments and into production. And customers tend to like to isolate out this production resources from the lower environmental resources where maybe a lot of things are happening, maybe there's some experimentation occurring. And accounts are a great way to get that level of isolation. But the challenge there is that you need to make sure that you still maintain a certain level of consistency across those environments. The last thing you want is to promote a change that you've made into production and discover that a setting is slightly different there or a resource hasn't been provisioned. You want to make sure that that consistency is there. Very similarly, in the disaster recovery space, you might be doing everything right. You might have passed your well-architected review. You might be using availability zones and load balancing and auto-scaling and all of the things you need to, but catastrophes happen. And at the end of the day, there may be a need for making sure that you're deployed into a second region that's geographically dispersed to make sure that you can fail over in the case of a catastrophic event. But once again, the last thing you want is to move into that DR environment and discover that something is inconsistent with what you've had in production and have to make those changes at the last minute. So these are reasons that customers tend to move towards multi-account, multi-region environments. But historically, there have been some challenges in sort of maintaining and administrating these types of environments because we do have very rigid scoping around accounts, rigid scoping around regions as well. So this has historically required some external tooling. And it might just be something as simple as maintaining a runbook, right? But once you have a runbook, then you have humans involved and humans can make mistakes. So the next stage is perhaps your administrators have built out their own sort of automation around this, a pile of bash scripts or PowerShell scripts sitting on someone's laptop. But those aren't typically formalized. Sometimes that can be knowledge that is lost along with individual hires. and can be inconsistent as well. Other customers have gone to third-party tooling. So they've brought in other products that will allow them to sort of manage at this higher level. But there are, of course, some costs associated with that. So listening to our customers, we added a new feature to CloudFormation called StackSets. And StackSets provides you with the ability to orchestrate deployment of CloudFormation stacks across multiple accounts and multiple regions from a central location using a single set of operations. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how StackSets works. So there's some vocabulary that we want to kind of make sure that we're all using when we talk about StackSets. The first is the target account. The target account is the location to which you wish to deploy CloudFormation stacks. And so these are accounts where you have pre-established the appropriate permissions to allow StackSets to perform those deployments. Those deployments occur from a centralized administrator account, which once again has the appropriate roles and permissions to interact with those target accounts. You generate your StackSet within your administrator account, and then you define the stack instances you wish to deploy, the accounts and regions that you wish StackSets to deploy into. And then using those permissions, it is then able to do that deployment. So in this particular case, we can see that we have provisioned 3 target accounts, and each of those accounts we're going to provision across 3 regions for a total of 9 stacks. So this is how StackSets works from an operational perspective. As you can see, we have 3 separate operations here: create, update, and delete. Similar to what you would see for a CloudFormation stack itself, you can now use those same types of activities at the macro level to provision StackSets. But interestingly, because we're deploying across multiple accounts and regions, there are some additional options that you can provide to StackSets around levels of concurrency, fault tolerance, and what's going to happen to those stacks if the StackSet is deleted. Perhaps the stack has some long-lived or stateful resources that you want to maintain. So taking what we've just discussed and applying it to our 2 use cases, first looking at the disaster recovery scenario. Now remember, in this scenario, our goal was to make sure that we had consistency across multiple regions for each of our business units. And in this case, we're representing each business unit as a separate account. So with StackSets in place, we would simply, as we wanted to make updates to those resources, we would modify our template, pass those new templates into the StackSet for the account, and then allow StackSets to do the updates across the multiple regions and report back whether or not there was success. Looking at our environment isolation scenario, things are a little bit more complicated. Here, each of our accounts represents a different environment, starting at development and then moving through staging and up to production. And these environments are set up slightly differently. Our production environment is a fully functional production environment. We've spread it across 4 regions perhaps to reduce latency. But we don't necessarily want all of those resources deployed across our lower environments. So to save some costs in our staging environment, we've limited ourselves to 2 regions, which is enough to allow us to test things like cross-region replication without having to worry about maintaining 4 regions at a time. And then our development environments are even simpler, set up in a single region to allow our developers to have an opportunity to play with new services and test new things without having, again, to pay for as many resources. And StackSets can handle this type of scenario as well by using a feature called parameter overrides, where we can simply define parameters for each of our different groupings of stack instances, and then use those parameters as we deploy out across the multiple accounts and the multiple regions. And this one, because it's a little more complicated, I actually kind of wanted to show it to you in practice. So we're going to do a quick demo kind of showing how that looks from the CloudFormation console. Now this is a pre-recorded demo. The reason that I pre-recorded it is we are talking about deploying a large number of stacks across several different regions, and I didn't want to have to wait for all of those regions to normalize. So we're going to do a little bit of big show magic of television style here. But the first thing I wanted to point out is before we can start using StackSets, we need to make sure we've fulfilled our prerequisites. And in this case, our prerequisites are around making sure that we have the appropriate roles set up. So in our administrator account where the StackSet will exist, we need to make sure that we have a role called AWS CloudFormation StackSet administration role. And the good news is we actually provide you a template in the documentation that you can use to set this up. And that's here at this URL. And we can put that in the chat as well. So once you have that role set up, and we'll go ahead and check my administrative account just to make sure I do have this. And here we can see the stack, and we can see the role as well. And that role name is important. We are expecting it to be that particular name. We can then go look at our target accounts. And again, the target accounts need to be able to have a trust relationship with that role in the administrative role. So we set up an execution role here, and again, we provide you with a basic template that you can then take and scope appropriate to your needs. And I have deployed that as well. We'll go into one of my target accounts here, and we'll take a look to make sure that we do actually have that in place as well. Here's my stack, and here's my role. Great, so we've fulfilled our prerequisites, and we're ready to start using our StackSets. So I'm going to go back up into my administrative account here, and I'm going to deploy my StackSet in Ohio. It doesn't really matter which region you put it in. I just like Ohio because that's my base of operations. So the way you get to StackSets is from this main CloudFormation menu. You can see there are now 3 options with Stacks, Exports, and StackSets. Clicking on that takes you to the initial launch page. I'm going to say Create a StackSet. And when we have the option of picking a predefined template from one of our samples, we can specify an existing template in an S3 bucket, or in our case, we're going to upload a template ourselves. The pre-existing samples are kind of nice because they allow you some of the sort of the basic operational stuff that folks tend to like to do with StackSets. So once we have our template selected, we're going to pick a unique name for this StackSet. I'm going to call it Baseline VPC, and I'm going to fill in this environment parameter. Now that parameter is actually coming from the template itself. So any parameters you have in your template, you can fill out there. And now we move into the StackSet part of it, where we define our accounts and regions that we want to deploy to. So I'm going to grab an account here that I want to use for my development environment. And remember, development, we only need a single region. So I'm going to select my region here. My deployment options, because I only have one account, my concurrency will keep it 1. And I have no tolerance for failure here. Okay, I'm going to skip over this ability to add additional tags, review my environment. Everything looks good here. And go ahead and create my StackSet. And that takes me to my StackSet resource page. So this looks a lot like a stack page. The difference being that you can see the operations that have occurred against this particular StackSet, whether or not they were successful. And then doing a refresh here, you can actually see the stacks that are being managed, the stack instances that are being managed in the StackSet. So this is my account and my region, and I can see that the stack has in fact been deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and create my second environment here. I'm going to create some more stack instances. I'll pick another account here. This account will be equivalent to my staging environment. So go ahead and paste that in. Now remember, for staging, we want to be across 2 regions so that we can test things like cross-region replication. So I'll go ahead and pick Oregon here and Ohio as well. Now the interesting thing is you can actually control the order to which StackSet will deploy in these regions. So let's say we want to go to Ohio first because that's where our master database resides. We can select that here. Again, a single account and no tolerance for failure. And now the interesting thing here is, remember, those parameters for the template. So we want to override that, right? Because we're no longer in dev. We're going to switch this over to staging and make sure that that's the value that gets pushed out as we provision into these 2 regions. Okay, so everything looks good. We're going to go ahead and create these stacks. Again, doing a refresh, you should see a new operation here at the top. And we can see the 2 new stacks. They're listed as outdated because, of course, there was no stack there previously. So StackSets knows that it needs to go and provision out to those accounts and regions. We'll jump into that account right now just to see what's going on over there. Of course, we don't have any StackSets here, so we want to switch over to stacks. And we can see the stack is being provisioned by StackSets. It's actually completed. It's a very simple template that just deploys a VPC. But it looks good here. Going back into my administrator account and switching back over to StackSets, I can see that that has, in fact, deployed successfully into the first region, and now we've moved on to our second region. So through the magic of television, we're going to assume that that's finished. We're going to go ahead and move on to our production environment. So we pick our third account here. And this will be our production account. And remember, production was across 4 regions. So now we're going to go ahead and pick our 4 regions here. Do Ohio, Ireland, let's see, get Oregon in there, and Sydney. And then again, we can make sure that we've got the appropriate deployment order. So in our production environment, if we're concerned about what order we deploy into, we can start in Ohio here. And again, 0 tolerance for failure. So if Ohio would fail, we would simply stop there. Again, we're going to override our parameter here. We're going to define this as our production environment. and go ahead and create those stacks as well. So now our stack set should consist of, after a refresh here, should consist of 7 stacks across 3 accounts here. We're going to do, again, the magic of television and say that those have all deployed appropriately so that now we can start having some fun with these stacks. So we're actually going to go ahead and make a change to this template. And the cool thing here is as we sort of pick our new template here, the change that we're going to make is going to allow us to sort of make real-time runtime decisions about how to provision using conditionals. So my initial template, you can see, is just the VPC. This is some additional code I want to put in. The first thing I'm going to put in is a conditional. We're going to look at that environment parameter, and we're going to make a decision about whether or not to deploy infrastructure based on that by building this condition. And the particular resource in question is going to be this subnet here. So you can see this subnet contains a condition attribute that says that we only want to deploy it if create production resources is true. And that's evaluated above against that environment parameter. So now we save this, and if all is working correctly, when we do the update to the stacks, we should see our subnet, but only in our production environment. So let's go ahead and upload that new template. Okay, so we select our basic template here, say next. We're going to fill in this environment value. Now remember, the initial stack that we created was our dev stack, so we want to make sure that we match that. The overrides will take into account for the other stacks. And here, because we're across 3 accounts now, we're going to go ahead and increase that concurrency and start deploying to the first region in all 3 accounts at the same time, just to speed things up a bit. So everything looks good here. Concurrency is right. And we're going to go ahead and update our stacks. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate all of our existing stacks against that new template. We realize that it is in fact outdated because the template does not match. So we're going to go ahead and do our updates. And through the magic of television, that is completed. And we're going to go ahead and drill into one of our environments to see if it has in fact worked as we hoped. So we're going to move into production first here. And remember, in our production environment, because of the conditional, we should hope to see a subnet deployed here. And looking at our resources, it did in fact deploy. So great, so our conditional worked there. And now let's check the opposite. So let's jump into our staging environment. And for staging, we should only see our VPC and not our subnet. So choosing that, and we do see that that is true as well. So our conditional has in fact worked, and now we can make sure that we are provisioning the appropriate resources into each of our 3 environments, sort of based on those environment tags, but still managing from a central location. So that gives you a little flavor of updating via StackSets. And I think it's a pretty cool feature, but there are some challenges with it. As you can see, this is a very console-centric experience, and I spend a lot of my time talking to developers, so I like to think of ways to sort of improve their lives through automation. And you could do this through the CLI, but there are a number of CLI calls sort of associated with creating stacks. It can get a little bit complex. So I thought to myself, if only there was some way to define these stack sets in a code-first manner. And of course, you know, I'm a CloudFormation developer advocate, so yes, there's a way. And that is to define the stack sets as a custom resource within CloudFormation. For those that are not familiar, a custom resource is the ability to define a resource within your CloudFormation template that is backed by a Lambda function. So a piece of code that will actually allow you to sort of do things outside of the normal purview of CloudFormation. So in this case, I wrote a Lambda function that will actually handle the provisioning of stack sets so that you can then essentially build a CloudFormation template that you feed into the service that triggers the external Lambda that will then provision the stack sets that will go out and provision the individual stack instances within your target accounts. So it gets a little inception-y here, but it's a really nice tool for having sort of a code-first mechanism for handling the deployment of stack sets as well. So the way I've defined my custom resource, I've exposed quite a bit through the template. You have the ability to define your stack set's name, the template URL, much like we did in the console, and also a way to push parameters into that template using a config file. And finally, you can define the regions and accounts that you want to deploy into. So as I mentioned just on the last slide, you do need a mechanism for sort of providing those parameter values. And I've picked a format very similar to the parameter files that you use when interacting with CloudFormation through the CLI. So you can see essentially you build a JSON file with a set of key value pairs with the appropriate values in it. And you can also set some tags this way too, which is kind of cool. So let me show you what that looks like in practice. I'm going to start out here in my Cloud9 IDE, which is where I've been kind of doing a lot of my development work lately. I'm going to show you quickly, this is the Lambda function itself. It's written in Python. And the important thing I want to point out is the CR helper library. This is actually a library that's available through our AWS Labs GitHub repo. It's a CloudFormation resource helper. And it's a pretty cool, very thin piece of code that handles the definition of your handler function itself. It provides you with a logger. And kind of handles a lot of the sort of the low-level stuff for you to allow you to focus on your code. So you can see basically you call CR helper's CFN handler here, and then basically all you have to do is write functions to map to the different actions that CloudFormation will take. This is my create action here. I pull in a bunch of stuff from the event, and then essentially it's just kind of a wrapper around the Bodo code to actually call StackSets here. Update gets a little more complex because I need to do some evaluation to figure out what changed. Was it the StackSet itself or the underlying stack instances? So I do some logic here, and then once again, I call the appropriate Bodo calls on the backside. And then delete as well, grab the information and do the delete. Now the one thing I want to point out is that I do have some retry logic baked into my custom resource. And the reason for this is StackSets will lock while it's performing operations. So if you have a create event in place, you will not be able to do a delete or an update until that completes across all of the stack instances in question. So I've got some retry logic here up to the 5-minute limit of my Lambda function for things like updates and deletes. So that's pretty much what the code looks like. This is what it looks like from a template side. Again, much like I showed in the PowerPoint presentation. You can see all of the different pieces that I've got exposed here. I do have some debug logging turned on. That's something that CR Helper provides for you. And you can see I've sort of parameterized this to within an inch of its life. So you're going to have the ability to see a lot of this when I deploy the stack. But of course, you could automate a lot of this. You can pull this stuff in from Parameter Store or other places as well. The payload in this case is just a very simple template that builds a DynamoDB table called events. And then this is the parameter file of all the information that I'm going to pass into that DynamoDB table, read capacity, write capacity, and tags here. Okay, so with all those pieces in place, let's go ahead and create our CloudFormation stack. So I'm going to go ahead and specify the location of my custom resource template. That pulls up our parameter page. This is the stack, remember, for the StackSet, so I'm going to call it checks event stack. I'm going to give it my list of accounts. We'll start with a single account. Capabilities, if I needed IAM capabilities, I could provide those here, but because we're only deploying DynamoDB, I don't need that. This is the location of that config file that I showed you, the bucket and the object name. Our list of regions that we're going to deploy into. So we'll start with 2 regions here. We'll go US East 2 and US West 2. And then I can give a description to the StackSet. And this will get pushed over into the StackSet object itself. And I could give my StackSet a unique name here, but I'm going to let CloudFormation do that for me using my custom resource. That way I don't have to keep track of those names or their uniqueness, and I don't have to worry about name collisions. And then finally, the URL location of my template within an S3 bucket. So I've got some secondary things that I can do here. Of course, in CloudFormation, I review everything. It looks good. And I'll go ahead and create my StackSet. So you can see here is my custom resource. Let me check event stack. The creation is now in progress. Jumping over on the Lambda side, I can see that my Lambda function has in fact triggered, and I can drill down into the logs to see exactly what's going on over there. So looking at this log file, I can see here, let me switch over to text. I can see the event itself coming in. I can see that it is in fact a create event. And then I can see my Lambda function processing that event, pulling that parameter information from the S3 object, and then calling Bodo to launch the stack successfully. Great. So looking over here, I can see my creation is complete. My StackSet has been successfully provisioned, and I can actually see the stack that's been provisioned through StackSet since I'm provisioning to the same account. Looking at the StackSet, here I can see, yep, sure enough, there I am provisioned into US East 2, and it looks like I'm in the process of provisioning in US West 2 as well. So everything seems to be going fairly well here. So let's make some changes. So we'll go back over to our StackSet, and we'll go ahead and make an update here. Okay, we're going to keep using the current template, but we are going to change these parameters. So we're going to add another account. And we'll add let's add another region as well while we're in here. So now we should be deployed across 3 regions in 2 accounts for a total of 6 Stack instances. And you'll notice that the cool thing here is that with this custom resource, both the StackSet itself and the Stack instances are all being managed as a single resource, which means that you have the ability to sort of modify both at the same time. Now, CloudFormation, because it's a custom resource, it's not going to be aware of those changes for stacks for change sets. So you actually have to go in and sort of drill into the code itself to see that evaluation occurring. So looking at these logs, we'll do a quick refresh on those, and we should see the update event here. There it is. So you can see the new set of regions and accounts coming in through this update event. These are the accounts here. And then what StackSets is, what our custom resource is going to do is it's going to do evaluations against those new values to figure out what's changed. So first it checks the StackSet itself to see if any of those values have changed, and then it starts checking the Stack instances. And we do see that we do have a new set of regions, so we know that we need to update our Stack instances. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy across all of the regions in the new account, and then we're going to add our US East 1 region to the existing account that we were already managing. Now notice that's going to be 2 separate operations here. So what that means is we trigger the first operation, which is a locking operation, and now we kind of have to sit and wait for that to complete before we do the second operation against the existing account. So again, magic of television, we're going to say all of that has succeeded, and we can see here that we have successfully deployed into all of our new accounts and regions. So the last thing we're going to want to do here, let's see, we'll just make sure that that all looks good. Sure enough, looks good here. Looking at our StackSet, everything looks good here as well. So the last thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to delete our StackSet. So we're going to go over here on the CloudFormation side, and we're going to delete our CloudFormation stack. And what that triggers on the backside is for CloudFormation to actually launch our custom resource that will go, it will delete any Stack instances associated with that StackSet and then the StackSet itself. So the nice thing here is it'll handle all of sort of the interdependencies between those different pieces in one action, rather than you having to go through and sort of clean up the Stack instances yourself. Now remember, we're operating within the construct of a Lambda function right now, and Lambda has a 5-minute hard limit on how long it can execute. So one thing I have seen is that for complex sets of Stack instances, we may actually hit that 5 minutes before we've successfully deleted all of our stacks. And in that case, what I often have to do is I will run a second delete to simply clean up the StackSet itself. So that's one place where we can sort of improve this code in the future. But having run those 2 deletes, we can see now that all of our Stack instances are gone, and doing a refresh on our list of StackSets, that is in fact deleted as well. And moving over to CloudFormation itself, we can see that the stack is gone as well. So that's a quick run through of what my custom resource is up to here. Let's see if I can get beyond this. So some of the features, quote unquote, of my custom resource right now is it will provide unique resource names for your StackSets. It allows you to handle your StackSet itself and the Stack instances as a single resource, which can be very nice for making sure that you're cleaning up appropriately and updating appropriately. Also, for now, it's fire and forget, which means we're not waiting for those underlying stacks to normalize. So it's very fast, although it doesn't quite line up with some of the more conservative stabilization techniques you see in CloudFormation. And it does have some retry logic baked into it. But what I'd like to do is that I'm in the process of open sourcing this code, and I'm going to try and provide a link to you to the GitHub repo for this code as soon as possible, so that you can take a look at it and maybe help me with some of these additional features. I'd love to get this integrated with code pipeline, and I'd really love to improve that stabilization logic, right? Set some retries in it so that it can actually tell you when all of the stacks have successfully deployed. So to recap what we've talked about today, we went through a little bit about CloudFormation itself and how you could use it to consistently deploy resources into your AWS accounts and regions, how StackSet builds on that to allow you to coordinate those deployments across multiple regions and multiple accounts. And at the end, I kind of showed you sort of some ideas about ways forward from a developer perspective on how you could use custom resources to take StackSets and sort of integrate them into your continuous delivery pipelines. So hopefully this has provided you with a little bit of context and some thoughts about strategies that you can use in your own environments. Just one last piece. I did mention I'm a developer advocate. I am one of a team of developer advocates for CloudFormation, and we are here for you. So come say hi to myself and Luis Colom on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.